Go ahead and
Yeah, sure.
cue.
All right. Welcome, everybody. So yeah, I really appreciate everyone coming this afternoon. I know it's the end of the day and people are probably a little bit tired. So I do appreciate you taking the time to sit in on this session. I will start by telling people a little bit about who I am. So I find that in most of these workshops, people start with kind of who they are professionally, and I prefer to start with who I am personally. So I am the father of two boys. So over my right shoulder on that picture is Liam, and over the left shoulder is Owen. Both my guys play rep hockey. Owen is 15, he's in grade 10. And hockey is absolutely his passion. And also kind of he found volleyball within the last year at school and really enjoyed playing volleyball and being a part of that at school. Liam's 13, he's in grade 8, hockey again, and also plays football. He is pretty independent and he kind of likes to do his own thing. He's always been the one that is, I'm doing this. If you want to play with me, that's fine. And if not, you can keep on keeping on because this is what I'm doing. So really, I've always appreciated his independence. This picture is from Jackson's Arm, Newfoundland. So that's my heritage is from Newfoundland. My father was born in that community. Actually, this picture right here, that house, my father was literally born in that house. And the hill in the background is the hill that we climbed to this spot. This spot for me, this is my absolute favorite place on the planet. Of all the places I've ever been, this is a spot where I feel I can just like exhale and just be completely present. Um, and for me, I just feel such a sense of peace in this location. And to me, just, we always talk about self-care and I kind of front load the presentation by saying everyone should have a place like this that they feel that they can go to and just breathe out and just be present. These are my boys as of December, so a little bit of a difference in them. So I coach my youngest, which is Liam, number 97 there, and we had a, a thing in the fall in the right before Christmas where some of Owen's team and Liam's team we had ice together, and I thought this might be the last opportunity for me to have ice with both of them at the same time, so I wanted to get a picture. So this is them there. Um, What else can I tell you? So I want to start off that I am not an expert on addiction. I am presenting from the lens of someone who has experience as a mediator and someone who has experience with various types of addiction within my family system. And, I've been impacted in various ways by addiction within my family. So that's kind of the lens I'm approaching this from. It's mostly experiential. So any of the stats or research that I present is stuff I research specifically for presenting. I am a mediator, been a child protection mediator for over 15 years. I've worked with over 1,000 families, and I specialize in families engaged in high conflict. That's primarily what I've done. As I mentioned, I'm a former child protection worker. I say that I escaped in 2000 and when was it? 2011. And I was at Hastings Children's Aid, which is the Belleville, Trenton area, as well as they were Bancroft at that time as well. I'm a qualifying psychotherapist, and my therapy practice focuses predominantly on athletes and first responders. So I do a lot of work on performance-based conversations. So for athletes trying to improve whatever their sport is, take it from an 8 to an 8.5, or the other thing is I do a lot of work in identity and identity reconstruction. So this happens a lot in the first responder community with they're not able to go back to the job. That will happen to all of them at some point, whether it's due to injury or retirement, or they make a choice to leave. So that sense of who am I now? That I don't have that first responder identity. And the same with athletes as they get older, playing high level sports, they reach a point where it's, who am I now? So they lose a sense of that identity. Um, And also an author. I've written a book on child protection mediation. It's a little bit older now, but for anyone who's kind of starting on that journey, I believe it's kind of a good resource to have in terms of rolling out the process and kind of balancing the room for the people that are there. One thing I do want to say for today is I have been having some issues with internet over the last little bit that it kind of glitches out sometimes. So if I freeze, I'll apologize in advance for that. I have shut everything off and gone in airplane mode, so hopefully we'll be able to roll through. So some of the things I want to touch on today is reviewing addiction-specific terminology, discuss some cultural considerations, as well as the implications of trauma. Applying a trauma-informed, non-judgmental strategies for asking about and discussing addictions. Also describing addiction as relational rather than an individual flaw or a willpower issue, and using a relational reframing to externalize addiction and trying to reduce blame and support more productive dialogue. There will be a little bit of overlap, but some of the stuff I wasn't able to attend the whole morning, but there's a few things that I've noticed that other people have covered that I'm probably going to reference in our conversation today. So I'm just curious, maybe you can throw this in the chat, some of the different types of addiction that people are aware of. I'll give you a minute to put some of those out there.
You can also feel free to just popcorn, unmute yourself, and we have social media, gaming, alcohol, fitness addiction, drugs, pornography,
Mhm.
food, social media, gambling, sex, eating, food.
Right. Yeah, so I appreciate that people listed so many different types of addiction there. The one that we hear mostly about is substances, which is drugs and alcohol, and super common that people would mention that. But there's also some other addictions that people can have. So gambling, gaming, food, shopping, internet, exercise, and so on. So a lot of these fall under what's considered a behavioral addiction. When we talk about behavioral addictions, interestingly, is that gambling is the only behavioral addiction that is listed in the DSM-5. So the
Mm.
DSM-5 is kind of, I heard someone recently refer to it as the psychology cookbook, which I thought was a really interesting way of describing it. But the only behavioral addiction that's listed in there is the gambling addiction. When we look at the International Classification of Diseases, which is what the World Health Organization references, it talks about gambling as well as gaming as behavioral addictions. And some of the other ones that are being considered are compulsive buying disorder or a shopping addiction, sex, which they refer to as compulsive sexual behavior disorder, pornography, which is problematic pornography use, kleptomania and pyromania were actually also are being considered as addictions, which I found really interesting through my research on this because I wouldn't have thought of those under the addiction category before. So when we talk about what is an addiction, I've referenced the DSM. Interestingly, it does not use the term addiction directly. It talks about substance use disorder, and it refers to it as a pattern of something leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. So substance use reflects a pattern of substance use leading to that distress. And typically, when we think about it, we talk about people being powerless over those addictions. So, in most of the 12-step programs, step one is we have become powerless over insert addiction that our lives have become unmanageable. So, when we look at it, it's a patterned, compulsive relationship with a substance or behavior despite negative consequences. And I think the negative consequences part is really important to focus on. because that is one of the things that differentiates addiction from other things that we might talk about today. It tends to provide relief. It can provide regulation, a sense of identity, coping. Um, it's more than a moral or a willpower issue. So it's characterized by impaired control, social problems, risky use or behavior, tolerance, and withdrawal. Um, so the one thing, talk about more than a moral or willpower issue. So often, Keith had mentioned this in the last session about, why don't they just do it for their children? Why don't they just stop doing it? It's because they have an addiction, right? If they could just stop like that, that's not addiction. And it's important for us to remember in terms of our judgments and, talking about moral willpower issue that people don't choose to have an addiction, right? I don't wake up one day and say, oh, hey, I think I'm going to be addicted to crack cocaine. That sounds like a good idea. Or I'm going to be addicted to whatever the behavior is. So I think that's really important to talk about when we're referencing what is addiction. And, referencing something that Lisa had also said is that recognizing that they still have love for their children, but they're stuck in whatever that addiction is. So one of the things I want to talk about, so Rick had touched on this a little bit in terms of terminology and this concept of addict. So you will not typically hear me use the term addict because to me, addiction doesn't define that person. And when we say addict, that means that is their identity, as opposed to being a part of their identity. It's a characteristic of who they are. It doesn't identify, and more importantly, it doesn't define who they are. So language that I would be more inclined to use is, so you might hear them say, I am an addict, or you might say they are an addict. I've heard it a couple times today, but not a lot. Um, but, other phrases would be they have an addiction. We say they have depression, or they're a person with addiction. They are depressed, as opposed to they are addicted, or sorry, saying they are addicted, because we wouldn't use something like saying they are a depressed, right? So describing it as something that they're dealing with or have a relationship with, as opposed to making it their identity, full stop. Um, yeah, and I think that this is a really important thing to talk about. I had a conversation. It was actually a service provider years ago, and I was really kind of driving home my perception of, using, have an addiction versus are an addict or am an addict. And this person was really, really, they suffered from addiction. They had addiction. And for them, the terminology was, I am an addict. And it was really interesting for me to try and, because I was trying to shift their thinking and shift their language and their tools to help them kind of move where they were at. But for them to have that sense of identity as an addict was important because that helped them to stay on track and to maintain their sobriety. So it emphasizes something that was said in Marianne's session this morning. One of the people in the session mentioned using flowery or fluffy language. I can't remember exactly which one they said, but we have to be aware that we're using language that matches what the clients are comfortable with. So as much as I would stay away from identifying someone as an addict, if that's how they see themselves, that might have some value with them. And I would maybe explore that with them to see what is the meaning for them with respect to terminology. Moving on, there are differences between addict and user. So a user is someone who uses substances. It can be, for pleasure or to cope. The one thing here is I would suggest that most of the people in this room right now are a user on some level. So, it could be have a drink occasionally, or maybe you use gummies or, on the internet, social media, whatever it is, using it even on an irregular basis or even a regular basis. But one of the differences is that it's not compulsive. You don't feel drawn to it all the time. Um, my belief is that I think most of the population has an internet or a social media addiction, and I challenge people to go a day without using social media and or to go a day counting how many times you check your socials. Whenever you see that red notification, you get that brain cookie, the dopamine. So try that one day, and then the next day try and go a full day without it, and I think you'll know pretty quickly whether or not you have an addiction to
Mm.
social media. But one of these, the term is I am a drinker. They are a drug user. I drink. I use substances. I engage in this behavior. And I think that that is important when we're talking about some of our clients. And I think their definitions can be skewed at different times between addiction versus use. Now, dependency is an interesting one. So it can occur with addiction, but it can also operate separately from addiction. So addiction typically involves a sense of dependency, but dependency can happen without addiction. So it's a biological effect that can occur when a substance is taken for weeks, months, or years. So our body starts to develop a tolerance for the substance. We require more of that substance to get the same result. And when that substance is removed, then we tend to have withdrawal symptoms from that. So there is a physical adaptation needing more to achieve that substance. When we talk about addiction, it is typically characterized by the negative consequences with that. And also, there's a compulsive behavior that tends to be associated with it as well. So, some people will frame addiction from an obsessive compulsive disorder lens. So, the obsession is I feel stuck. I'm thinking about whatever the behavior is or whatever the substance is. And the compulsion is actually acting on that to get some relief. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but that is the way that some people will view addiction. When we go back to thinking the differences between dependency and addiction, I would say if someone's using heroin, neglects their children, homeless, engaging in unsafe behaviors to finance their use, we are likely to say that they have an addiction because there are some negative consequences associated with their use. The other side of that is if someone stops using heroin, they have regular and safe contact with their children, they have a steady job, they volunteer, so it's not having those negative consequences on their life anymore, and they might be in a treatment program, whether it's Suboxone or methadone. Would we still say that they have an addiction? And I think it's important for us to differentiate that when we're talking to people because that goes back to that whole identity piece and that sense that they can have with respect to change and their progress and their growth. And I would suggest that person has a dependency because of that physical connection. That's why they're still on the Suboxone or the methadone, but aren't engaging in those unsafe behaviors to kind of fuel that the dependency. In the room, are there any examples that you can think of that might qualify as dependency but not addiction? You can say it, put it in the chat, or you can unmute and say something. So I see relational dependency. Anything else? Okay. So for me, some big ones, caffeine. A lot of people in the room have that physical dependency to it. To go off the caffeine, you'll experience withdrawal symptoms from that, nicotine, sometimes prescription medications, but you're not necessarily engaging in unsafe behaviors to engage in those substances.
Paul, we do have a question.
Sure.
The question is, what about exercise for mental safety? Can Matilda, and maybe if you can
Yeah, if you want
unmic
to
yourself
expand.
and just give us a little expansion on that. Yeah.
Hi.
Right.
So I ask about exercise, more as a dependency. I know for myself, if I'm not working out, my mental health is declines. It's not, I don't think it's an addiction. Um, but I certainly feel like I'm dependent on it to kind of regulate my mental state.
Mhm.
No. So if that makes sense. So that's why I asked that question.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but if looking at it from the outside in, I would say that maybe that is a dependency, right? So, but you're using that in terms of self-care. So it's not creating negative consequences in your life to be using exercise and fitness because if you think of all the neurochemicals that are released through exercise to help us feel good, when we have clients that are struggling with different mental health challenges, one of the things we tell them to do is go out and be active, right? So you're using it in a positive way to help with the work that we do in terms of self-care. So I think that that's a positive thing. And sure, there could be a dependency there. I think it can trip into addiction and addictive behaviors when it starts having negative consequences in different areas of your life, though.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to touch on culture a little bit. Cultural norms have an impact on the likelihood of addiction, the diagnosis of addiction, and various treatment methods. So, accessibility can contribute to the development of an addiction. So, if you look at Canada, alcohol and marijuana are legal here. So, having that stuff readily available in the different stores or different locations you pick it up increases the risk of addiction just by virtue of it being available. Cultural norms can also impact the threshold of what is considered an addiction. So if your culture or your family has very rigid norms, what we're saying here is use may be considered addiction because it can go back to that all or nothing thinking, as opposed to looking at things like was mentioned in the last session about a continuum of 0 to 1. Zero is no use, one is addiction, and that's viewed in a very binary sense, as opposed to acknowledging that in between 0 and 1, there are an infinite number of decimal points, right? And looking at each individual differently. So those cultural norms can have an impact on what we define as an addiction as well. When we look at individualist cultures, addiction is seen as an individual problem with individual treatment. So stigma tends to be lower in those environments, and the likelihood of seeking treatment is higher. So low stigma, high likelihood of treatment. And the treatment is typically individually based. So in individual cultures, it would be that one person goes to therapy, that one person goes to rehab, that one person attends a 12-step program because it's individualistic in nature. In collectivist cultures, it's seen as a moral or social failure that dishonors the family. In those situations, the stigma tends to be higher and the likelihood of seeking treatment is lower. So, exact opposite of individualist cultures. And the reason for that is because it's being kept in secret, and oftentimes those individuals are seen as the weakest link in that family unit. And we don't want that person to go for treatment because it kind of puts our private issues out on display and can bring shame to the family. So, what I thought was really interesting was when I was doing research on this was the differentiation specifically with respect to indigenous communities and how it was separated from individualist, collectivist, and then indigenous was seen as a separate category unto itself. And the one thing that really jumped out was how in the indigenous community is seen as a community issue. So it is not just about that one person. So addiction impacts that person, which impacts their ability to parent. That impacts their ability to engage in the community and those types of things. So also looking at the indigenous communities, healing tends to involve reconnecting with community and reconnecting with culture. And I really want to highlight what Lisa had said in the panel discussion as part of the process that she follows, that it's so important for her to have an understanding from the clients about what is their connection with community, what is their connection with culture, and in particular with addiction. If we can help clients make those connections, it can help with that recovery process. It's less based in shame and more about everyone coming together and helping and being one. Interesting, and that connection with the culture involves a connection with mind, with body, with spirit, and with the land. So it's a more fulsome approach to the recovery process. And also, there are better recovery outcomes when family is included in treatment. So, even in individualist cultures, if we can find ways to involve the family in the recovery process, there is a greater likelihood of that individual recovering from their addiction. A couple things, just quick stats. So, individualist cultures tend to report higher levels of alcohol addiction compared to collectivist cultures. For me, I question the accuracy of this again because of individualist cultures, there being less stigma and more open to talking about it, whereas in that collectivist bubble, I guess we could say, there's less likelihood of talking about it. So, I do question the accuracy of that. Social media addiction is times higher in collectivist cultures compared to individualist cultures. And another interesting thing I read was that through COVID, addiction rates increased. I think we could all anecdotally agree with that. What's interesting is that since COVID, since all the lockdowns, that rates of addiction have actually dropped more towards what they were pre-pandemic. When talking about trauma, we can talk about the adverse childhood experiences for our clients. So these are the different ACEs that are on, or the different experiences that are on the ACEs. Important for us to recognize that trauma impacts brain development. So if we experience trauma at a young age, it's going to impact us long term, increases the risk of heart disease. Cancer, depression, substance misuse, risky behaviors, they are all connected with ACEs. And the more ACEs you have, the higher the risk. And the earlier age of onset for our substance use and an earlier escalation of use. So if I have a lot of ACEs, or if I have no ACEs, I may be prone to substance use or addiction later in life anyway. But if I have ACEs, it's going to increase the risk, and it's also going to make suggest that it starts earlier in life. So something to be aware of is childhood trauma is strongly correlated with internet addiction. And I suspect that has to do with escapism, right? So we have these trauma experiences and we're not able to find places in kind of the real world that feel safe. So then we will find environments in the internet that can help us feel safe.
We have
Um,
one comment from Patricia. Six or more
sure.
ACEs is 4,000 times more prone to be an IV user, is what Patricia has shared with us. I think I'd just like to add as well, in just terms of a cultural perspective of ACEs, is that we do know that ACEs was a longitudinal study that covered predominantly males, Caucasian, over a lifespan. So that, to add the cultural perspectives in, my understanding is that we look at ACEs for racialized people at being younger than the age is set, just because of the way that trauma is carried in the bodies generationally. So
Mhm.
that's just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, and we could get into a whole conversation on generational trauma, and so I mean, when we experience trauma, it impacts us on a genetic level, right? And creates markers for future generations, and this speaks a lot to generational trauma. And in my understanding from indigenous cultures is they refer to it as blood memory, and that it will last up to 7 generations. So. ACEs now impact future generations as well.
That's right. And the way that you even worded it, right? So at the end of it, we could still walk away with ACEs impacts you. I mean, it may not, even if you're looking at it from the study that it was, which was very culturally narrow, we could
Right,
still take the information from it and apply it to everyone. Any sort of impacts of trauma are inside and out, should be considered.
right. Um,
Sorry, I took you off track there.
no, that's okay. Yeah, just a couple of the other things I wanted to touch on. So, emotional and physical abuse. So, if we're talking about childhood traumatic experiences, significant and positive associations with love addiction. That's one of the ones that was maybe not mentioned in the chat earlier. Their physical abuse rates are higher amongst those using sedatives and methamphetamines compared to individuals using alcohol. And not surprising, sexual trauma is associated with compulsive sexual behavior later on in life. Yeah.
Love addiction, that's interesting. Do you think is correlated with the escapism and the isolation that one experiences? When you mentioned that, it actually makes me think of a new community that's coming up that's quite prevalent, which is the incel community.
Mhm.
Is there some sort of correlation between that? I know that there's all sorts of issues involved, but is there a correlation around addiction and love addiction that we should consider as well in this community?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So for me, I would suggest that love addiction probably has more to do with attachment,
Hmm.
in that sense of, so maybe a disorganized attachment or an anxious attachment where I'm feeling like I always need to be with someone to kind of reaffirm and feel that connection. And then when that's not there, I'm seeking it from someone. So
Hmm.
that would be my suggestion is it's more connected to attachment,
Right.
but I
So
can't
then
say
there's
with
a
certainty.
trauma history or some sort that needs to be considered
Mhm.
again. Hmm.
And trauma impacts attachment. So people that experience childhood trauma are more likely to have a disorganized attachment.
Correct.
So, talking about family systems theory, which is kind of tying into the title of today, it views the family as an interconnected emotional unit. So when we're dealing with our clients, seeing them as part of a family system, so not just that one person in isolation, it is seeing them as who they are within that family system, that family group, as a cousin, as an uncle, as a mother, as a child, as a grandchild, whatever that might be. So the understanding that everyone in that unit is interconnected and that each person, their behaviors and their actions affect the entire family system and impact the whole group. So focusing on the patterns, the roles, the emotional interdependence within them. And one thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is those terms interconnected and interdependence. So interconnected is being linked or related. You can still kind of function independently as Paul the individual, but interdependence is Paul within that family system. So it's a part of interconnectedness and it is a reciprocal reliance, right? So there is a connection between, so if I look at even Onika, us being connected through York Hills, there's an interdependence because it's reciprocal. I rely on her for some things and she relies on me for some things. And it's a bit of a give and take, and we influence each other in terms of that relationship, and it's not one-sided. So really important in terms of that family systems dynamic, looking at people as part of a whole and not simply as individuals. When we look at the relational approach, so this is from more of a psychotherapeutic lens. So relational is focusing on the dynamic between the client and the therapist. So in therapy, the best predictor of therapeutic outcomes is the therapeutic relationship. It is the main catalyst for change. Next in line would probably be time. That the struggles will change over time. And then we can get into individual modalities. There's debates on which modalities are the most effective, but all the research points to therapeutic relationship being the most important part of any approach. So when we look at it from a therapeutic perspective, so it's exploring how the person's past and current relationships influence their mental health. So we want to emphasize the relationships and approaching our clients with kindness and unconditional positive regard, because when we move from the therapeutic lens to the ADR perspective, us as the facilitator, we also need
Mhm.
to establish a positive relationship with our clients. They need to know that when they are coming to those group meetings that they can trust us. They need to know that they can rely on us to create a safe environment. So it's really important as soon as that intake appointment happens, when you're talking with your families, that you are starting to build a relationship with them. And again, going back to what Lisa said, sorry, Lisa, I'm stealing all of your talking points. Um, but treating all of our clients with kindness and understanding that they all have an individual story and an individual history. And that's what we're there to kind of hear about from them, to understand who they are as individuals and treating them with unconditional positive regard. So that's kind of the relational approach. When I talk about addictions as part of the family system, this started for me about 25 years ago. And I had a friend of mine at the time who was diagnosed with cancer. And he said to me at that time, so he's, 23, 25 years old. And he said, the cancer that he was diagnosed with was, in his opinion, very curable. And as far as I know, he's still here. I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but he said to me, Paul, I will have a relationship with cancer for the rest of my life. And that was incredibly profound for me at that time as a young man. He was a young man, that he would acknowledge that he would have that relationship. Because every time he gets sick, every time he has an ache or a pain, it will cross his mind, oh, is it back? And I view addiction in a similar light, that wherever you are in your recovery journey, that you have a relationship with that addiction. And where it starts is, if that person is entering into sobriety and they've just had a really bad day, and that thought crops into their mind about, I'm just going to have a substance. I'm just going to engage in that behavior. And then I think, oh, wait, no, I don't do that anymore. Now I insert whatever the new coping mechanism is. Hopefully, it's a healthier one. And that happens really, really quick. So they still have a relationship with that addiction and with that history of that addiction. They're just in a different place in that relationship. So it's not the same relationship they once had. It's evolving. So when we think about addictions within or relationships within addiction, it can be the client and that substance or the behavior. So that is actually the what we would refer to as the addiction. It can be so, and that can also be connected to an attachment substitute. They feel something is missing that they can get from the addiction. Um, it can impact relationships in terms of, whether I feel connected to somebody. It can be, trauma bonding. It can deteriorate relationships based on that behavior and based on that substance. It provides predictability for them. So that's part of the relationship with them, with addiction. So I've heard some people that struggle with addiction say, whatever that thing is, that substance, it's never let me down. Because every time I used that substance or engaged in that behavior, I knew exactly how I was going to feel, and it felt that way after. So they don't have that disappointment that they might get from people in their lives. So they then have a relationship and a sense of connectedness and a sense of trust in whatever that addiction might be. Um, the other thing that I want to point out is, the relationship among the family and the client who's struggling with whatever that addiction is. And as I mentioned, I'll have a relationship with that addiction forever. What we sometimes lose sight of is that the family also has a relationship with that client's addiction, because they have past experiences with all of, that individual's behaviors, whatever they did to engage in that addiction. Sometimes I'm not going to go through the list of what the behaviors are. You guys know what they are, right? So, but as a family member, I have a relationship with that person in their addiction. I have a relationship with their addiction as well because of how it's impacted me when they were going through that. And even now, as they're sober or getting sober. So, what I sometimes will think of is viewing the addiction as a separate entity from that person. And that's when we talk about it being part of the family system. So looking at it similar to a partner, to a friend, a coworker. So if my relationship with my romantic partner is going well, that impacts my interactions with others. So how my relationship with whatever substance it is or whatever behavior it is, if it's going well, so we think dependence, then that may not impact my other relationships and they might be going okay. But if my relationship with those behaviors is not going well, then that can impact my other relationships in a negative way. Uh, when I think about this, I think about addiction basically as an abusive partner and in how we talk to our clients, how we support our family members. If we have a family member who is in an abusive relationship, are we as quick to blame them? Sometimes we'll say, well, why don't they just get out? Well, because they don't feel that they can get out. So if we look at that same lens when we're talking about addiction, they're in an abusive relationship. They don't feel that they can get out. They may feel that they don't have the tools to get out of that relationship. They're stuck, and that's addiction. So once we start to shift our lens and how we look at it, if we look at it from an abusive partner, we tend to have less blame on the people that we're working with. And this is something that I talk about with families when I'm doing a joint mediation session. At the beginning of the session, if I'm aware that there's addiction in the family, I will discuss it from this lens. And the reason for that is to try and soften the room so the conversations can be a little bit more open and a little bit more honest with one another. And I like to highlight when I talk about the family having a relationship with that client's addiction. So one of the things I talk about is when a family member says to you, hey, you're really acting strange right now. Are you using again? Are you doing the behavior again? Oftentimes that person who has struggled with addiction is quick to become kind of explosive and they react. And the reason that that happens is because with addiction, there tends to be a ton of shame and a ton of guilt associated with our behaviors when we were actively engaged in that addiction. And sometimes, if we're into recovery, there might also be some denial of where I am in that recovery journey. So that tends to kind of create some big emotions for people, and they become very reactive. I like to make sure I clarify with people the differences between shame and guilt. So shame is I am a bad person, and guilt is I did bad things. And there's a difference in those, right? So shame links into identity again in a negative way. Guilt, I did bad things. Shame, not a helpful emotion. Guilt can be a helpful emotion. Recognizing that I had negative behaviors in the past can help motivate me to make change in my life. So and oftentimes when I'm talking to clients about this, you just see them nodding. The person that struggled with addiction, you see them, yes, I did some bad things and I feel like crap about it. And when you ask me if I'm using now, even though I'm not, it activates me and takes me back to those heavy feelings. So that's when they react that way. And then what I try to do also is remind them that the person who is asking that question is acting out of care, acting out of compassion, and acting out of curiosity. Because of their experiences, they also default, oh, they must be using again. Paul was really yelly today. He must be his addiction must be back in full swing. When it could be I just had a really bad day. So the people around us also default to those attitudes, those thoughts and those behaviors and those emotions. So then when I react, so we get into this loop. So it's important before we're having this conversation in the group meeting to remind them of all of the emotions that are connected to that addiction. I'm the one who's had the addiction, has the relationship directly with it. I have a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. So when you ask me, it brings that to the surface and I'm very emotional. The other person says, well, when I ask that, it's actually because I care about you and I'm worried. And I want to make sure that you're okay. And I want to make sure that the children are okay. And also, it's all right for you to say, yeah, you know what? I am really struggling with addiction right now. I'm back using, or I'm really tempted. I'm struggling. I haven't done anything yet, but it's right here. I'm ready to go. Okay, let's talk about it. So we try to take the judgment, we try to take the shame out of the room so that we can actually engage in a functional conversation about it. So I've already kind of touched on this, right? Behavior patterns based on the assumptions of that person being actively engaged in their addiction again, the guilt, the shame, and approaching from a place of love and compassion and curiosity, right? So trying to remind families to be curious. And what I find is once I address this at the beginning of the joint mediation session, um, I do find that conversations about it do soften in the future part of that meeting. And but they're still talking about it. They're still addressing it. People are not avoiding it. They're not ignoring it, pretending it's not there, but understanding it from a different lens means that, if Onika is worried about me, she's going to ask some questions. And my hope is that I can pause for a second, respect where she's coming from to ask that question, and then we have a conversation. So strategies that I like to use begins during intakes. As we mentioned, that therapeutic relationship is the most important thing, and I believe that carries over into mediation, into family group, into Indigenous approaches. Whatever we're doing, we have to have a strong therapeutic relationship with our clients because they, again, trust. They have to know that they can trust to open up to us. When I think of my intakes, I am asking a lot of really important questions because it's going to help me prepare for the meeting, right? So I ask every single client I meet with, well, don't be absolute and it's not all or nothing, right? I ask the majority of my clients, um, are there any concerns of addictions in the family? And then I will say sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling, gaming, pornography, shopping, social media. I will rhyme off a bunch because oftentimes we default to substances. And they'll say, oh, no, no, no. And then I come out with some of the behavioral addictions and they're like, oh, yeah, maybe that one. And we talk about it. And I let them know that I'm asking because if there are concerns for addictions, same as concerns for mental health, and I would say addiction falls under the mental health umbrella, it will come up in the group meeting. Without a doubt, it will come up almost every time. So it helps you to prepare for how are you going to manage those conversations when they do come up. Do you do it like I will try to do a teaching at the beginning of the joint mediation session to just bring it into the room. Let's have the conversation. Um, Avoiding language that pathologizes or blames. So staying away from the term addict, using, has an addiction, struggles with an addiction, relationship with addiction, have it as a separate thing, right? Avoiding the blame, trying to get away from that, externalizing it again, the relationship component, instead of a part of that person's identity. Be realistic and honest with our clients. So I think this really comes in when people are on the journey of sobriety because we get, I'm never going to use again. I'm done with that forever. So I would ask them questions. What's different this time? To see if there truly are some differences in terms of behaviors and realizations, recognizing that relapse and slips are a part of recovery. That doesn't give clients permission to have a slip or a recovery, or sorry, a slip or a relapse, but acknowledging that it is possible. Say, look, you've had a slip in the past. You may have a slip in the future. It could happen. So maybe we need to have a conversation about what that looks like. Reinforcing the strengths behind slip. The only way that I can have a slip or a relapse is if I have had a period of sobriety before that. And we lose sight of that so often when we're talking with families that have had addiction in their life. We focus on the relapse, we focus on the slip, and lose sight of the fact that maybe they were sober for 2 weeks or 2 years before that. So shifting our lens away from the blame and focusing on, being strengths-based and trying to pull them out of that and helping them pull themselves out. Reminding the group, the person who struggled with addiction, that they didn't choose to get there in the first place. So they're not going to choose to be addicted in the future or to actively engage, be actively kind of hooked into that behavior or substance again. If they're in a period of sobriety, they've made a decision that this is not helpful and this is not healthy for me, and I would like to make change. They didn't choose to be addicted in the first place. They're not going to choose to be addicted in the future, but it could happen. And we need to talk about what that might look like for them. Some strategies that you can use in your group meetings, whatever that might be. Some might be a green light, yellow light, red light. This is one that I got from Carolyn McAlpine, I don't know, 15 years ago. So green light, okay, this is the plan right now. While everything is going great, you have your addiction under control. You're nice and stable with whatever is happening in your life. That is green light. All right, now let's talk about yellow light because it's possible. You're struggling. Maybe you've had a slip. Maybe you're considering using or that behavior again. You're starting to struggle. Okay, what are the indicators that that's happening? Are there behaviors that other people are seeing? Are there behaviors that you notice? Okay, let's talk about what those are. Now let's plan for what's going to happen in the family when those indicators are there. How are we going to have that conversation? How are we going to plan for the children when that situation happens? Then we go to red light. Red light is full blown. In this situation, it might be a relapse. Okay, these are the signs and symptoms. This is the planning. This is how we're going to have the conversation. This is what's going to happen with the children. And break it down in a tiered way. So again, we're not absolute. We're not binary that I am sober, I am actively using. Understanding that there is a continuum and how are we going to deal with some of those different steps along the way. So I find that that can be really helpful for families. Another one that I use, and I actually do this at the beginning of the first joint mediation session I have with every family. Private practice, I do it with child welfare mediation, and it's a teaching that I call Focus on Forward. And I think we have time, so I'm just going to do the teaching as I do it. I talk about, so I want everyone in the room to imagine a large group of people. And that group of people is going to have a race. And it can be any kind of race that you want it to be. It can be a running race, bicycle race, motorcycle, wheelchair, swimming, car. I don't care. This is your race. And half of that group is going to focus on forward. That group is going to be looking ahead to the future, to that finish line. They will finish their race. They're going to finish it in good time, and it's overall going to be a good day for them. The other half of the group is going to do their race like this, looking behind them, looking at the past the entire time. Now, we can all think of times when we've been walking, looking behind us. We're driving, we look behind us, and we pull the wheel. We're all over. So that group may or may not finish the race. But if they do, it's going to be significantly slower. They're likely to wipe out. They're likely to hurt themselves, and they are likely to hurt other people. So when we have our race, we will focus on forward and how to do things differently. And we know we need to do things differently because we're here. If you had it all figured out, you wouldn't be mediation, family group, IADR. You'd have it all figured out. But we're here, so we know we need to do things differently. I'll then also share with them it's like driving in a car. And I'm adapting this one because I got some extra ideas from Nicole. But when we're driving in a car, where do we look most of the time? We're looking through that windshield. That's the future. That's where we're going. We also need to be looking through our side windows and our side mirrors. That tells us what's happening right now. I'm going through an intersection. I look left, I look right, keep going, looking through the windshield. I need to know what's around me in the present. And occasionally I'm driving and I look in that rearview mirror because that's my past and it informs where I am now. It's also telling me if there's any risks coming up from my past. But if I'm driving and I'm constantly staring in that rearview mirror, what's going to happen? I'm going to crash. So again, thinking about what we're doing, our journey in the meeting, as we're working with families struggling with addiction, we are looking through that windshield. We are focused on forward and on doing things differently. And remind them that when they get to that finish line, it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It takes time and it takes a lot of hard work. But when you reach that finish line, it is peace. It is the ability to finally breathe out and be able to say, okay, this is how things are, and I'm okay. We're okay, and we're able to kind of settle into our life at that point. So I do that teaching at the beginning, the first joint mediation session with every family I work with. Because then when we're having conversations, they start going to the past and the blame. We can say, no, we're going to glance at the past. Oh, that was a cool experience. Let's bring it forward. Let's see if there's a way we can make that happen again. Ooh, that wasn't a good experience, but there are lessons in that experience. Lessons to pull forward so we don't repeat mistakes. So we will glance, but we're not going to stay there. And it helps keep families focused on how to do things differently instead of being stuck in those ruts from the past.
Well, we're just at the 2-minute countdown mark.
Yeah, we're good.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So some of the key points from today. One, substances are not the only addictions. We need to be aware of behavioral addictions. And it's important that we kind of widen our net in terms of what we think could possibly be an addiction. Looking at, some of those negative consequences that are impacting people's lives. Treat client language matters. So using terms like addiction, dependency, and use, they are not all the same thing. Using the term addiction instead of an addict, I think is important because addiction is a characteristic of that person's identity. It is not their identity. And I think that we need to differentiate that as service providers, which goes into, again, treating our clients with unconditional positive regard. Addiction is a lifelong relationship, so it does not end when we enter recovery. And that's for the person that is dealing with the addiction as well as the people around them. They are still connected to that person's addiction and recognizing that it can have an impact in our relationship in the future. I want to say is just reminding all of us that we need to, oh, I froze, I guess. I need to remind everyone that we focus on forward and how to do things differently and in a positive way for our families. And
Yeah.
that's it.
Thank you. You
And
did
there's my
three
shameless plug. You can buy my book.
never shameless. Plug away.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Paul. We are going to move into, if there's any quick questions. Yay, thank you, Lisa. We are going to move into a break now, a bio break, and then we will be reconvening, it looks like, at 4 p.m. And if you, for the closing marks and evaluations, and if you can join us at your original main link that you used this morning, I've also included the link in this chat, but it is the same link that you used this morning. Do we have any questions or comments for Paul as we're moving through? Oh, and to let you know, some links have been shared. Patricia Wright shared a link for a Calm screen link and EMS5 work. I think this is the work that she had been talking about in that she had been doing. If anybody, Patricia had to run, so if anybody could add to that some context, it would be appreciated. Oh, and she also wrote, Lindsay asked me for screen info, not sure how to send it. So this is Lindsay, are you in here? Did you get the screen
I
info?
think I'm
No?
the Linda. I'm the Lindsay.
Oh, so okay,
Don't
okay.
worry, I've got it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so thank you. We'll see you in a little bit. Take care. Paul, are
Well,
you
there is
hanging out
one
for a minute?
question there about could high conflict clients be addicted to conflict? I think that's a really interesting question.
Mhm.
And I also like to say I appreciate, yeah, I always say clients engaged in high conflict, again, looking at that identity and that labeling, as opposed to say like they are high conflict people, because again, that could be just that one relationship. So if it's an addiction, I would look at it. That's really interesting. You know, are they engaged in high conflict with multiple people? Then I would say maybe whatever kind of neurochemical hit they get off of that. I suppose it's possible. I would also question if there's other underlying mental health diagnoses that are fueling that, if it's, consistent. Yeah, capacity or role models. You talk about role models, so people say you don't have a manual for parenting, and I totally disagree with that. I think our manual is how our parents raised us. And, as we become parents, we have a choice of whether we just read that book and do it the same way, or do we rewrite some chapters? So I think that speaks to role models if they've not seen people that can resolve conflict in a functional way. Also, I mean, conflict is about a relationship too, right? So who am I engaged in conflict with? If it's just that one person, well, it could be mostly the other person. They might instigate, but I might be super reactive to it, which again could speak also to attachment. But then we have this constant push-pull between them. There's no conflict if somebody tries to engage you and you don't engage.
Mhm. Okay, I think that wraps it up. I don't see any other further questions. And says thank you. Take care, everyone. We'll see you in a little bit. Have a good
Thanks,
break.
everyone.